Imagine a warrior class so revered. Their very existence shaped an entire nation for centuries. But what made the samurai truly unique? And how did they rise from humble beginnings to become Japan's ultimate elite? Welcome to my channel Word of Time, and get ready to uncover the untold story of a legendary samurai, a legacy that still echoes today. For most of the world, the word samurai brings to mind a warrior in layered armor, gripping a curved sword, and standing with calm purpose. The image is familiar, but the real story behind Japan's warrior elite is far deeper and more complex than the popular picture suggests. The samurai did not appear overnight. Their rise was slow, shaped by local conflicts, shifting politics, family rivalries, foreign threats, and changes in how land and power were managed. What began as a class of mounted fighters living on the edges of empire eventually became the force that governed Japan for centuries. This story starts long before the famous battles, before the names Minamoto or Tokugawa meant anything. Early Japan was ruled by an imperial court that relied on noble families, religious institutions, and local officials to manage distant provinces. Over time, the court's reach weakened. Powerful families in the countryside built their own networks of followers, people who could defend land, collect taxes, and keep order. These early warriors were not yet samurai in the later sense, but they laid the foundation for everything that followed. As we move through history, we see how these provincial fighters grew in importance. They learned to ride, shoot the bow, and fight in organized groups. They formed tight bonds of loyalty with their leaders. Their world was shaped by honor, land, and kinship. When conflict erupted between major clans, these warriors were ready. The wars that followed did not only create heroes, they also forced new political systems into existence. The result was the first military government in Japanese history and the formal rise of the samurai class. This shift changed Japan in every way. Samurai were no longer just fighters. They became landholders, governors, judges, and later, scholars and administrators. Their culture developed through religion, philosophy, and the demands of constant warfare. The code we now call Bushido never existed as a single set of rules, but the ideas behind it, loyalty, duty, restraint, and skill, grew over time. These ideals shaped how samurai behaved, how they taught their children, and how they were remembered. The story of the samurai is also the story of Japan's political evolution. Military governments rose and fell. Powerful warlords fought for survival and ambition. Entire regions turned into battlegrounds. Periods of peace brought new challenges and forced the warrior class to redefine its purpose. Some samurai became poets, teachers, or bureaucrats. Others struggled to adjust to a world without war. By the time Japan entered the modern age, the samurai as a formal class disappeared, but their influence remained strong. Today, samurai continue to capture the imagination. They appear in films, novels, anime, and games. They represent discipline, bravery, and a sense of honor that many find inspiring. But the real story is far richer than the legend. The true rise of the samurai spans more than 1,000 years. It moves from small clan skirmishes to massive civil wars, from horseback archers to castle-holding lords who commanded tens of thousands of fighters. It includes political reform, social change, cultural achievements, and moral struggles. To understand how the samurai rose to power, we first need to look at the world they came from. Early Japan was shaped by strong families, shifting alliances, and a central court that struggled to control distant regions. Long before the first warriors called themselves samurai, the basic forces that would shape their class were already at work. The earliest organized states in Japan formed around the Yamato court, which gained influence by uniting powerful clans. This court relied on a mix of ritual authority, farming communities, and alliances with local leaders. The emperor stood at the top, but real power often rested in the hands of influential aristocratic families. These families managed land, controlled resources, and provided soldiers when needed. In the early centuries, warfare looked very different from what we associate with the samurai. Battles involved large groups of foot soldiers, simple weapons, and leaders who fought more for local dominance than for national ambition. Armor was basic, and mounted warfare had not yet become common. Most conflict took place between clans that wanted better land, control over trade routes, or regional authority. As the court developed, it tried to organize the provinces under a system of appointed governors. In theory, these officials collected taxes, kept order, and sent revenue back to the capital. In practice, many were unable to enforce their authority. Provinces were far from Kyoto, roads were dangerous, and local families held more practical power than distant officials. The court depended on these families to maintain peace, which gave them room to grow stronger. By the 8th and 9th centuries, the system was changing. Land ownership shifted from government control to private estates, known as shon. These estates often enjoyed tax exemptions granted by the court, which allowed influential temples, nobles, and local leaders to grow wealthy. As shon expanded, the court lost both revenue and direct power over the countryside. This created a new problem. Estates needed protection, first from bandits, then from rival clans. In time, the demand for protection became the key factor that pushed warrior groups to the forefront. Families in the provinces began to train men for mounted archery, making them more effective in open field combat. Horses became essential to warfare. Skill with the bow became a defining trait of early warriors. These fighters were not yet the samurai of later centuries, but they represented the first steps toward that identity. Local leaders built private militias. Some were small bands loyal to a particular landholder. Others grew into large networks of armed retainers who defended estates across an entire region. These groups fought for land, influence, and survival. Their loyalty was often tied to personal relationships, not government orders. What mattered most was trust between a leader and his followers. Meanwhile, the imperial court remained focused on culture, ceremony, and politics within the capital. It produced poetry, refined manners, and artistic achievements that still influence Japanese culture today. But its power over the provinces continued to fade. Court nobles relied on letters and reports to understand distant conflicts, while real decisions were settled by force on the ground. The sharper this divide grew, the more important provincial warriors became. During the Heian period, which began in the late 8th century, the court enjoyed a golden age of literature and art. Yet beneath this cultural brilliance, tensions grew. The Fujiwara clan, the most powerful aristocratic family of the era, gained control by marrying daughters into the imperial line. Their dominance at court shaped politics in the capital, but left them less able to deal with unrest outside it. As shon multiplied, the officials sent to manage provinces often found themselves trapped between court expectations and the realities of local power. Many governors hired warriors for protection, and many of those warriors stayed behind even when the governors returned to the capital. These fighters created their own ties with local families and expanded their influence. The shift from court-centered to province-centered power was slow but steady. Over several generations, the warrior class became an essential part of political life. Clans like the Minamoto and Terra gained strength by controlling regions, collecting revenue, and maintaining stable networks of fighters. They maintained loyalty through gifts, land rights, and shared identity. This created a new social structure. At the top stood the major warrior clans, tied by ancestry and reputation. Beneath them were branch families, each managing smaller estates. Below them were the retainers, the core fighting force who trained, rode, and fought to defend their leaders. Then came the farmers, artisans, and others who worked the land that supported the warrior families. Everyone's role depended on land, protection, and the constant need for defense. As these patterns developed, warfare also changed. Mounted archers became the dominant fighters on the battlefield. Early samurai prized skill with the bow above all else. They also valued personal bravery and individual combat. The idea of making a name through bold charges and accurate shots took hold. Battles often began with formal exchanges of names and challenges, where warriors identified themselves before fighting. This early form of battlefield culture laid the groundwork for later samurai ideals. Courage, loyalty, and honor grew from the practical needs of life in the provinces. Warriors needed to trust each other. Leaders needed to inspire confidence. A reputation for skill and reliability meant better rewards and stronger alliances. So by the end of the Heian period, Japan was divided between two types of power: the elegant court in Kyoto and the armed families who managed the countryside. The court still claimed authority, but the warriors made the decisions that mattered in daily life. Their influence grew until major clans controlled entire regions and began to challenge each other directly. This tension set the stage for open conflict. As rival clans fought for control of both the provinces and the court itself, Japan entered a period of war that would transform the country. The rise of the samurai was no longer subtle. It was about to reach a dramatic turning point. During the Heian period, life in Japan was defined by contrast. In the capital, nobles moved through a world of refined etiquette, poetry, and court politics. Outside the capital, the provinces faced bandit raids, border disputes, and the constant pressure of managing land that was becoming harder for the court to control. This split between elegance and unrest shaped the growth of the warrior class. At the center of the era stood the Fujiwara family. Through careful marriages and political maneuvering, they guided the court for centuries. Their focus remained close to the emperor, the palace, and the cultural life of Kyoto. But while the Fujiwara concentrated on influence in the capital, other families grew strong by managing the regions. These families developed real military strength, and over time, their power outgrew the court's ability to restrain them. Two of these families would later define the age: the Minamoto and the Taira. Both traced their origins to imperial princes who were sent away from court and granted lands in the provinces. These descendants built networks of local supporters. They protected estates, kept order, and offered their services to nobles in the capital who needed loyal fighters. Their reputations grew with each successful campaign, and each estate brought under protection. This was the moment when the term bushi began to take shape. These provincial warriors developed their own culture based on riding, archery, and loyalty to their leaders. Their skills matched the needs of a countryside where disputes were often settled by force. While court nobles debated poetry contests, the bushi trained through real encounters on the ground. The court's military system, once used to defend borders and maintain order, had grown weak. Instead of relying on government soldiers, officials turned to private forces. Warrior families gained contracts to protect tax shipments, guard estates, and escort nobles traveling between the capital and the provinces. Each successful mission strengthened their position. Over time, their role shifted from temporary security forces to essential partners of the ruling elite. The Taira family took early advantage of this rise. Under leaders like Taira no Masakado and later Taira no Tadamori, they became key players in policing the seas and coastal regions. Their control of maritime routes allowed them to influence trade and communication. They became trusted by the court, receiving titles and authority that increased their standing. The Minamoto, meanwhile, earned their reputation through campaigns in the eastern provinces. The region was fertile but unstable. Disputes between landholders were common, and the Minamoto became known for their ability to restore order. Their successes in the east gained them loyal allies and a strong base of operations far from the capital's reach. As both families expanded, so did the warrior culture surrounding them. Training became more organized. Young warriors learned to ride from an early age and practiced archery until it became second nature. Many also trained with spears and later with swords, though archery remained the core of early combat. Armor improved, becoming lighter and more suited for mounted fighting. Alongside this growing martial identity came a deepening sense of loyalty. Warriors sought leaders who could offer protection, land, or advancement. Leaders rewarded skill and discipline, lifting talented fighters into positions of influence. This relationship between lord and retainer formed the backbone of the emerging warrior class. While these developments unfolded in the provinces, the court faced growing internal problems. Conflicts among nobles weakened central authority. Financial troubles made it harder to keep provincial governors in line. As the court's influence faded, regional families gained freedom to settle disputes their own way. Each victory built their confidence. Each failure at court increased their importance. One event that highlighted this shift was the Hagen conflict of 1156. A dispute over imperial succession escalated into open fighting. The court called on both the Minamoto and the Taira to support rival factions. For the first time, the two major warrior families faced each other on a large scale. The Taira emerged victorious, and their leader, Taira no Kayamori, rose to unprecedented power within the capital. Kayamori's success showed how far warriors had come. He held influence that rivaled the greatest nobles. He placed relatives in important positions and arranged marriages with high-ranking families. The warrior class had reached a new stage where its leaders could shape national politics, not just provincial affairs. But the same rise that brought the Taira to power also created resistance. Many aristocrats feared their growing influence. Many warriors felt left out of rewards. Younger branches of the Minamoto family, suppressed after the Hagen fighting, waited for their chance to return. Both families struggled to balance alliances, ambitions, and the pressure of maintaining order. Tensions continued to rise after the Heiji conflict of 1159, when Kayamori defeated more Minamoto rivals and secured even greater control. His power was real, but so was the resentment that surrounded him. The balance between court and warrior families had shifted too far, too fast. The political world could not hold the pressure. By the late 12th century, the stage was set for one of the most important conflicts in Japanese history. Years of political disputes, regional rivalries, and personal ambitions were moving toward a breaking point. Warriors who had once served behind the scenes were now central figures in national affairs. Their skills, bonds, and ambitions would soon reshape the entire structure of Japanese government. At this point, the warrior class was no longer a loose collection of provincial fighters. It had become a major political force with its own values, traditions, and expectations. Battles in the decades ahead would not only decide which family held power, but also define the identity of the samurai for generations. As warrior families gained influence during the late Heian period, a distinct class began to form around them. These warriors were more than hired fighters. They managed land, built networks, and served as the backbone of provincial governance. Their role grew from necessity, and the demands of life in the countryside shaped their identity in ways that set them apart from the nobles in the capital. The key to their rise was land. The provinces were full of shown estates owned by nobles, temples, and wealthy families. These estates needed constant protection. Bandits threatened trade routes. Rival clans tried to expand their influence. Local disputes could erupt with little warning. The bushi became essential partners to estate managers because they could enforce boundaries and secure resources. In return, they received land rights, income, and positions that allowed them to build long-term power. These arrangements created a practical and personal kind of authority that often mattered more than official titles. A bushi leader who could protect multiple estates gained loyalty from farmers and retainers. His success depended on his ability to solve problems on the ground. This shaped a straightforward, results-driven style of leadership. Warriors judged each other by action, not by ancestry, though lineage still offered important advantages. Families that produced reliable protectors rose quickly. Their retainers became extensions of their influence. These retainers, often from smaller landholding families, pledged loyalty in exchange for security and advancement. Many took on the bushi identity even if their backgrounds were not originally martial. Over time, this broadened the class and gave it a more stable base. Training played a major role in shaping this new warrior culture. Young boys from warrior families learned to ride, handle weapons, and understand military discipline. They joined their elders on patrols, watched how disputes were settled, and gained a sense of responsibility tied to their clan's reputation. Skill was important, but so was reliability. Each warrior carried the name of his family on the battlefield and in negotiations. Failure could bring shame not just to the individual, but to everyone connected to him. The weapon that defined early Bushi life was the bow. Mounted archery required strength, balance, and practice. Battles favored open fields where riders could move quickly and fire from a distance. Armor developed to support this style of combat. It became flexible, with large shoulder guards and lacquered plates that protected without limiting movement. The look was distinct and recognizable, and it carried symbolic meaning. Armor represented status. It showed who a warrior served. It stood for a life dedicated to readiness. Alongside military training came the habits of daily life. Bushi families managed farms, collected taxes, oversaw irrigation, and resolved conflicts among local residents. They built fortified homes to protect their people. Their power depended on the stability of the land they controlled. A capable Bushi was part soldier and part administrator. His authority grew by keeping peace, ensuring production, and defending boundaries. These responsibilities shaped the values that later came to define the samurai. Loyalty was not an abstract idea. It was the glue that held these communities together. A retainer who stood by his leader during difficult times gained trust that could last generations. Courage on the battlefield earned respect. Self-control mattered because fear or rash behavior could put an entire clan at risk. These values grew from real needs, not philosophical ideals. They were habits formed through the demands of life in the provinces. As provincial warriors strengthened their hold on local governance, the court continued to lose its ability to manage the regions. Official appointments still mattered, but they often depended on warrior families for support. When conflicts broke out, the court relied on the same fighters who were already shaping the countryside. This dependence fed the confidence of Bushi leaders and gave them more influence in political decisions. Economic change also contributed to the rise of the Bushi. Control over land meant control over agriculture, and agriculture remained the heart of Japan's economy. Warriors who protected fields and maintained order ensured the steady flow of rice, the most important form of wealth at the time. As their influence increased, they developed revenue systems that supported their households and expanded their following. These networks could include hundreds or even thousands of people, all tied together through loyalty and shared interest. By this point, the Bushi were no longer simply responding to local problems. They were building lasting institutions. They kept detailed records, managed exchange agreements, and maintained communication lines between scattered estates. Their growing administrative skills prepared them for even larger responsibilities in the future. The rise of the Bushi was not peaceful. They faced competition from rival clans, internal conflicts, and challenges from powerful landholders. Raids, skirmishes, and regional wars were common. The struggle for land fueled grudges that lasted for generations. But each conflict refined the class further. Victories brought prestige and new followers. Losses taught hard lessons and shaped strategies for the next fight. Over time, the balance of power shifted. The court still held ceremonial authority, but the Bushi controlled the practical realities of the countryside. Their leaders developed ambitions that extended beyond regional influence. They saw the weaknesses of the court and the growing reliance on their strength. As their families grew stronger, so did their desire to shape the country's future. This growing tension between court authority and warrior power eventually reached a point where the old system could no longer hold. The Minamoto and Taira, the two most influential warrior families, were already building rival networks that stretched across Japan. Their rise, combined with the court struggles, pushed the country toward a conflict that would redefine its leadership. The forces that shaped the Bushi, land, loyalty, warfare, and administration, were now strong enough to challenge the old order. The next major clash would not be a regional dispute. It would be a national struggle that would bring the warrior class fully into the center of Japanese politics and give the samurai their first real chance to govern the country. The growing strength of the warrior clans eventually reached a breaking point. As the Minamoto and Taira expanded their influence, the political world around them became unstable. Court factions fought for advantage, and every dispute seemed to widen the divide between the capital and the provinces. It was only a matter of time before these tensions erupted into full-scale war. The conflict began with the Taira at the height of their power. Under the leadership of Taira no Kayamori, the clan had secured positions at court and held critical posts in the government. Kayamori arranged marriages with high-ranking nobles, managed trade routes, and placed his relatives in key offices. His rise marked the first time a warrior family had held such authority in Kyoto. But his influence created resentment among both nobles and rival warriors. Many felt that the Taira had overstepped, acting more like rulers than servants of the court. Meanwhile, surviving branches of the Minamoto family waited for a chance to return to power. After earlier defeats, they had been pushed to the margins, but they continued to build support in the eastern provinces. These regions provided strong, loyal fighters and leaders who were willing to challenge Taira dominance. When members of the imperial family opposed Kayamori's actions, they turned to the Minamoto for help. A political struggle soon escalated into a violent uprising. The conflict that followed is known as the Genpei War. It lasted from 1180 to 1185 and brought the country into a period of intense fighting. Warrior families chose sides based on old alliances, personal ties, and the promise of land or reward. Battles spread across the country, from valleys to mountain passes, from the shores of the inland sea to the outskirts of Kyoto. The war introduced new tactics and styles of fighting. Mounted archers still played a major role, but the scale of the conflict pushed warriors to adapt. Large armies marched across long distances. Naval battles became important, especially in the western regions where the Taira had strong maritime control. Castles and fortified positions grew in strategic value, as both sides sought secure bases for their troops. Early in the war, the Taira struggled to maintain their leadership. Kayamori's death left the clan without a strong central figure, and their attempts to protect the young emperor they supported became increasingly difficult. The Minamoto, led by figures like Minamoto no Yashinaka and Minamoto no Yoshitsune, gained momentum. Yashinaka advanced toward the capital with remarkable speed, while Yoshitsune led daring operations that broke Taira defenses. The Minamoto leaders had different personalities and ambitions, and their rivalry caused tension within their own ranks. Yashinaka was bold but unpredictable. Yoshitsune was brilliant in battle but lacked political support. Despite these internal challenges, the Minamoto forces continued to win key victories. Their campaigns pushed the Taira westward, forcing them to retreat by sea and regroup in the coastal regions they knew best. The final stages of the war took place along the shores and islands of the inland sea. The Taira used their naval experience to hold their ground, but Minamoto pressure was relentless. The decisive battle came at Dan no Yura in 1185. Both sides fought fiercely, but shifting currents and strategic missteps weakened the Taira position. During the battle, members of the Taira leadership attempted to protect the young emperor they supported, but with defeat certain, many chose death over capture. The fall of the Taira marked the end of their influence and a turning point in Japanese history. With the war won, the Minamoto clan held unrivaled power. But victory alone did not guarantee stability. The country needed a new political structure, one that acknowledged the growing authority of the warrior class. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the eldest surviving leader of the clan, understood this better than anyone. He had built strong ties in the eastern provinces, commanded vast networks of retainers, and maintained firm control over his warriors. Rather than rule directly from the capital, he established his headquarters in Kamakura, far from Kyoto. In Kamakura, Yoritomo created a system that placed warriors at the center of governance. He developed military offices that supervised samurai, managed disputes, and ensured loyalty across the country. One of his most important innovations was the appointment of Shugo and Jito, military governors and estate stewards. These officials acted as his representatives in the provinces. They collected taxes, enforced order, and maintained communication between Kamakura and the local warrior families. This system marked the birth of Japan's first military government. The emperor still held symbolic authority, and the court continued its cultural traditions, but real power shifted to the samurai under Yoritomo's leadership. The entire structure was built around loyalty, military readiness, and administrative control. It reflected the values of the Bushi class and gave warriors a formal role in shaping the country's future. The new government did not erase conflict. Rivalries continued, and Yoritomo had to act decisively to secure his position. Even within the Minamoto family, disputes led to violence. Yet the foundation he created proved durable. It set a pattern that would guide Japan for centuries, with warrior leaders acting as the true heads of government while leaving ceremonial authority to the imperial court. The Genpei War did more than settle a family dispute. It marked the moment when the samurai moved from supporting roles to leadership. Their skills, their values, and their ways of managing land and loyalty became central to national governance. The structures set in place after the war strengthened the identity of the samurai and confirmed their place at the top of Japanese society. From this point forward, the warrior class would not only fight battles, but also oversee justice, collect taxes, and guide policy. The world that emerged from the Genpei War was shaped by the expectations and practices of the Bushi. Their influence would soon define an entire era. When Minamoto no Yoritomo established his base in Kamakura, he set in motion a major shift in how Japan was governed. The new system placed warriors at the center of political life. Their skills, networks, and values shaped the institutions that would guide the country for generations. This military government did not replace the imperial court, but it operated alongside it, holding real authority while respecting the cultural and ceremonial roles of the emperor. Kamakura was far from Kyoto, both physically and symbolically. Its location reflected the new distribution of power. The eastern provinces had long been the heartland of the Minamoto clan, and they provided the loyal fighters who had carried Yoritomo to victory. By building his headquarters there, he reinforced his connection to the warriors who supported him. He also placed himself at a safe distance from the political conflicts that had destabilized the capital. The structure Yoritomo created was designed to maintain order in a country shaped by both tradition and warfare. At the center stood the shogun, a military leader with authority recognized by the emperor. Yoritomo did not claim to replace the emperor. Instead, he held responsibility for military affairs and governance. This arrangement allowed the imperial court to continue its cultural role while giving samurai the power to manage the practical realities of the provinces. To keep control over distant regions, Yoritomo relied on a network of officials who operated under his command. Shugo, or military governors, were placed in key provinces to oversee police matters, hunting down rebels, and ensuring peace. Jido, or estate stewards, managed individual shon. They collected taxes, protected land, and served as the shogun's representatives. These posts strengthened ties between Kamakura and the countryside, giving Yoritomo a system of oversight that stretched across Japan. The system also provided security for warrior families. As Jido and Shugo, they held positions backed by law and custom. Their rights were protected by the Kamakura government, which reduced the uncertainty that had marked the earlier era. This stability encouraged families to serve the shogunate with loyalty, knowing that their land and status had official recognition. Kamakura's governance extended beyond military and administrative control. Yoritomo established the samurai dokoro, a central office responsible for managing warriors and overseeing discipline. He also created the mandokoro and manchujo, offices that handled finance and legal disputes. These institutions formalized the responsibilities of the Bushi class. They introduced procedures that balanced loyalty, duty, and the rule of law, reflecting the values that had shaped the warrior's rise. While the new system provided structure, it also faced challenges. The death of Yoritomo in 1199 left a power vacuum. His sons were too young and lacked his authority. The question of who would guide the government led to internal struggles, and soon another family stepped into the center of power: the Hojo. The Hojo clan, led by Yoritomo's widow Hojo Masako and her father Hojo Tokumasa, became regents for the shogun. They did not claim the title of shogun themselves. Instead, they ruled through the position of shikin, or regent, allowing them to guide policy from behind the scenes. Their approach kept the military government functioning while avoiding direct conflict with the imperial court. Over time, the Hojo gained tight control over the shogunate and maintained authority for more than a century. During the Hojo period, the Kamakura government faced significant threats. Warrior clans challenged each other, and disputes over land continued. But the greatest danger came from abroad. In the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire, led by Kublai Khan, sent envoys demanding that Japan submit to his rule. The shogunate refused, and the Mongols launched 2 invasions in 1274 and 1281. These campaigns tested the unity and strength of the samurai. The battles against the Mongols revealed both the discipline and the limitations of the warrior class. Samurai were skilled in individual combat and mounted archery, but the Mongol forces fought in coordinated units with advanced weapons and tactics. Explosive projectiles and massed infantry formations were unfamiliar to the Japanese defenders. The invasions pushed the samurai to adapt quickly, and their resistance was strong. Storms that struck during both invasions crippled the Mongol fleets. The defenders saw these storms as divine intervention. The cost of defending the country, however, placed great strain on the shogunate. Rewards were difficult to distribute because there was no new territory to grant. Samurai expected compensation for their service, and without it, frustration grew. The Hojo relied more heavily on their authority to maintain order, but economic pressure and dissatisfaction increased. Despite these problems, the Kamakura government continued to function. It remained grounded in the values that had shaped the warrior class: loyalty, discipline, and responsibility. The legal system grew more sophisticated, offering ways to settle land disputes and maintain fairness among warriors. This contributed to a sense of stability, even during difficult times. Over the decades, the balance between the shogunate and the imperial court shifted again. Some at court resented the military government's long hold on power. By the early 14th century, Emperor Go-Daigo sought to restore direct imperial rule. His plans led to open conflict with the Kamakura government. Several samurai supported him, including notable figures like Ashikaga Takauji, who would later rise to significant power. The struggle weakened the shogunate. Samurai divided their loyalties, and the Hojo lost their ability to maintain unity. In 1333, forces loyal to Go-Daigo captured Kamakura, ending more than a century of military rule. The fall of the Kamakura shogunate marked a turning point. It closed the first chapter of samurai government, but opened the way for new political structures that would shape Japan's future. The foundations laid in Kamakura did not disappear. They influenced later governments and defined the role of the samurai for generations. The idea of a military leader guiding the country, while the emperor maintained spiritual and cultural authority, became a pattern repeated throughout Japanese history. The institutions created during this era gave the samurai a clear place in society, established expectations for their behavior, and set the tone for the periods that followed. With the fall of Kamakura, the country entered a time of shifting alliances and growing cultural change. Samurai life would continue to evolve as warfare, politics, and society moved into new and unpredictable directions. By the time the samurai had become central to Japan's political system, they were more than warriors. Their lives were shaped by a mix of military duties, family responsibilities, and social obligations. They governed land, enforced law, settled disputes, and supported the economic stability of the regions they controlled. Daily life for a samurai reflected a balance between readiness for conflict and the everyday work of running a community. Training began early. Boys born into samurai families learned discipline from a young age. They practiced archery, riding, and later swordsmanship. They studied etiquette so they could serve their lords with confidence and behave properly at gatherings. Lessons focused not only on physical skill, but also on mental steadiness. A young warrior needed to show patience, respect, and self-control. These traits were valued because they reflected the reliability expected from those who protected the land. Most samurai lived in modest homes compared to the grand estates of Kyoto nobles. Their residences were built for defense as well as comfort. Many were located near important roads, rivers, or fields that required protection. A samurai household included the immediate family, servants, and retainers. The retainer network formed the core of a warrior's strength. Each retainer had duties and a place within the household. Their loyalty held the group together and ensured that the household could function in both peace and conflict. The daily routine varied depending on the region and the demands of the time. In peaceful periods, samurai spent much of their day managing land. They oversaw farming schedules, irrigation work, and tax collection. They listened to local complaints, mediated disputes, and kept detailed records. Their duties required a clear understanding of local needs. A samurai who maintained order and supported the farmers gained trust and stability. This practical leadership strengthened his position and helped secure his family's future. Women in samurai families played important roles as well. They managed household affairs, supervised servants, and protected the home during a lord's absence. Many were trained in basic weapon use, such as the naginata, a pole weapon suited for defense. While men were expected to lead in battle, women contributed to the security and moral foundation of the household. Their guidance shaped the next generation of warriors, passing on values of discipline and loyalty. Religious practices were part of samurai life. Families observed Buddhist ceremonies and visited local shrines for blessings. Many warriors believed that spiritual focus helped them face danger with calm minds. Some supported temples or sponsored rituals, strengthening ties between the warrior class and religious institutions. Over time, certain teachings, especially from Zen Buddhism, influenced the samurai approach to discipline and self-awareness. Despite their responsibilities, samurai had moments of leisure. They practiced calligraphy, read poetry, and studied classical texts. These activities were more than hobbies. They showed refinement and connected the warrior class to the cultural traditions of Japan. The ability to write well, speak politely, and understand court customs helped samurai interact with nobles and officials. A well-rounded warrior could navigate both the battlefield and the formal settings of governance. The samurai also valued martial demonstrations. Archery competitions, riding events, and mock battles allowed warriors to test their skills and maintain readiness. These gatherings strengthened bonds among retainers and provided opportunities for rising fighters to show their ability. Success in such events could lead to recognition and promotion. During periods of conflict, daily life changed dramatically. The household shifted into a state of readiness. Weapons were inspected, armor repaired, and supplies gathered. Messengers traveled between allied clans. Strategies were discussed, and scouts monitored the movements of rival forces. For young warriors, this was a time of intense learning. They observed how leaders made decisions and how experienced fighters prepared for danger. On campaign, samurai lived with a constant strain of travel, uncertainty, and the threat of combat. They moved in groups, carrying their equipment on horseback or by pack animals. Nights were spent in makeshift camps or temporary shelters. Meals were simple, often rice or dried food. The atmosphere was focused and disciplined. A single mistake could lead to disaster for an entire unit. Combat itself was unpredictable. Early samurai engagements often emphasized individual action, where warriors announced their names and sought worthy opponents. But as conflicts grew in scale and complexity, tactics began to shift toward coordinated movement and group strategy. Even so, personal bravery remained a central expectation. A samurai who showed courage under pressure gained lasting reputation. The community around a samurai depended on his performance in both peace and war. Victories brought rewards that benefited the entire household. Losses or failures could lead to hardship. The pressure to uphold family honor was constant. This expectation shaped how warriors carried themselves and how they taught their children. Every action reflected on the lineage they represented. Loyalty was the core of a samurai's social identity. A warrior's bond with his lord was more than a contract. It was a relationship built on trust, mutual duty, and shared purpose. The lord provided land, protection, and opportunity. The samurai offered service, strength, and obedience. When conflicts arose, this bond was tested. Some samurai struggled when orders contradicted personal beliefs or family ties. These moments produced some of the most dramatic stories in Japanese history, as warriors chose between loyalty and conscience. The samurai's social role extended beyond personal duty. They shaped the character of the regions they controlled. Their presence brought structure and security. Their decisions influenced trade, farming, and justice. As the warrior class matured, its members developed a sense of responsibility not only to their lords, but also to the people who lived under their protection. Over generations, these roles created a shared identity. The samurai saw themselves as guardians of order and tradition. Their lifestyle blended martial skill, administrative work, cultural learning, and moral discipline. This combination defined the class and distinguished it from other groups in society. The expectations laid on samurai shaped how they interacted with the world. Whether managing fields, advising leaders, or riding into battle, they were expected to act with resolve and dignity. Their conduct set standards that others observed and imitated. These expectations would later evolve into a more formal set of ideas about behavior, influencing how the warrior class understood its purpose. The social and personal responsibilities of the samurai gave the class a strong foundation. They were tied to the land they managed, the families they supported, and the communities that relied on them. As the political landscape changed, their role continued to grow, and the demands placed on them became even more complex. The image of the samurai is closely tied to their weapons and armor. These tools were more than equipment. They represented status, skill, and the long tradition of the warrior class. Over centuries, as political conditions shifted and battles changed, samurai adapted their methods of warfare. Their gear evolved with them, shaped by experience and by advances in craftsmanship. In the early centuries, the bow was the primary weapon of the samurai. Mounted archery formed the core of battlefield tactics. Warriors trained to ride with ease while drawing and firing at high speed. The yumi, the long asymmetrical bow, had great range and power. It allowed skilled archers to strike opponents at a distance before closing in. Early battles often opened with archers exchanging shots while riding past each other, testing accuracy and timing. The sword would later become the symbol of the samurai, but in the early period it played a secondary role. When fighting moved to close range, warriors turned to the tachi, a long curved blade worn edge down from the waist or suspended from the belt. The tachi was effective for slashing from horseback. As combat styles changed and more fighting took place on foot, the design shifted toward a shorter, more balanced form. This later developed into the katana, worn edge up and used for swift, controlled strikes. Spears also became important. The yari was simpler to produce than a sword and effective against both cavalry and infantry. Its reach made it well suited for group tactics, which grew more common as armies increased in size. Some spears had straight blades, while others had forked or curved tips for hooking opponents or breaking through armor. These variations reflected the practical demands of battle. Another weapon closely linked to samurai tradition was the naginata. This long pole arm with a curved blade was versatile in many situations. It could sweep through infantry lines or keep opponents at a distance. Its length provided leverage for strong, sweeping motions. Though male samurai used it in battle, the naginata later became strongly associated with women of samurai households, who trained with it for home defense. Armor also evolved alongside the weapons. Early samurai wore the oiroi, a large box-like armor designed mainly for mounted archery. It provided strong protection and allowed the warrior's arm to draw the bow without restriction. The armor was built from small lacquered plates laced together with silk cords. This construction made it flexible while still offering solid defense. The elaborate lacing and ornamentation reflected rank and taste. Colors, patterns, and family emblems helped identify warriors on the field. As warfare became more mobile and infantry tactics grew in importance, the bulkier oyuroi became less practical. It gradually gave way to the dumaru and haramaki styles, which fit closer to the body. These designs offered better movement and were lighter to wear. Armorers continued to refine the construction, using leather, iron plates, and decorative elements to balance protection and comfort. Helmets were crucial. The kabuto offered protection for the head and face. Many featured crests, horns, or other decorations that served as clan symbols or personal marks. These designs were not only expressive, they helped warriors stand out to allies in the chaos of battle. The menpo or face guard added another layer of protection and often had fierce expressions to intimidate enemies. Shields were uncommon among samurai, largely because their weapons and armor were designed for mobility. Instead, protection came from skill, awareness, and the layered structure of their gear. On the battlefield, warriors relied on both personal training and group strength to stay safe. Tactics shifted over time. In the early periods, combat emphasized individual duels. Warriors announced their names, described their lineage, and sought opponents of similar status. Personal honor played a large role in how battles were recorded and remembered. These encounters were celebrated in military tales that praised bravery, loyalty, and skill. As the scale of warfare expanded, this older style became harder to maintain. Armies grew into thousands of soldiers. Commanders needed coordinated action rather than individual heroics. Strategies began to focus on positioning, timing, and the use of terrain. Infantry formations, spear units, and disciplined archers helped control the flow of battle. Communication became vital. Drums, conch shells, and flags signaled orders across the field. Siege warfare became more common as fortified positions spread across the landscape. Castles and strongholds required long-term planning, supply management, and teamwork. Attackers needed to cut off resources and pressure defenders over days or weeks. Defenders relied on elevated walls, moats, traps, and narrow corridors to slow advances. Siege weapons, including large bows, rocks, fire arrows, and battering tools, pulled the fighting away from open fields and into strategic environments designed to favor the defenders. Naval combat also shaped samurai tactics, especially during conflicts in western Japan. Ships carried warriors across coastal waters and rivers. Battles took place from deck to deck, where arrows and spear thrusts were exchanged at close quarters. Control of waterways could decide the outcome of entire campaigns. The ability to move troops quickly by sea gave certain clans significant advantages. The arrival of firearms in the mid-16th century created one of the largest changes in samurai warfare. Portuguese traders introduced matchlock guns, known in Japan as tanegashima. At first, some warriors viewed them with suspicion, seeing firearms as lacking the refinement of traditional weapons. But their effectiveness soon became clear. Daimyo who adopted firearms gained a strong edge. Guns allowed lines of infantry to strike at long range with force that armor could not easily withstand. Commanders adapted rapidly. They developed rotating firing lines, used barriers to protect gunners during reloads, and timed volleys to break enemy charges. Castles were redesigned to resist gunfire with angled walls and stronger gates. The shift demanded changes in training and battlefield organization. Although swords and bows remained part of samurai culture, firearms became essential tools in large-scale battles. Craftsmanship remained central to the warrior identity throughout these transitions. Swordsmiths, armorers, and bow makers worked with precision and pride. A finely made sword was valued not only for its cutting ability, but also for its balance, temper, and appearance. Warriors passed down treasured blades through generations. Armor, too, often became heirlooms, restored and adjusted for new wearers. Every tool carried meaning. A sword symbolized discipline and duty. Armor represented readiness and service. The bow connected warriors to ancestral traditions. Spears and firearms showed the practical needs of the changing battlefield. Together, they formed a visual and functional language that shaped how samurai fought and lived. The evolution of samurai weapons and armor tells the story of the class itself. Over centuries, the warrior adapted to new technologies, new enemies, and new political conditions. Each change reflected the realities of the time while still honoring older values. This balance allowed the samurai to maintain their identity even as the world around them shifted. The discipline required to master their tools influenced every part of their lives. Whether riding with a bow, leading infantry, or defending a castle wall, the samurai approached battle with focus and respect for their craft. Their weapons and armor were extensions of their training, their history, and their place within society. As the samurai rose to prominence, their values and behavior were shaped by many influences, but few had as lasting an impact as Zen Buddhism. It offered a way to understand duty, death, discipline, and the inner state of the warrior. Over time, Zen ideas blended with older beliefs to form the moral foundation that many later associated with the samurai spirit. Zen entered Japan from China during the Kamakura period, at a time when warriors were gaining authority. The appeal was immediate. Zen emphasized direct experience, clear awareness, and personal discipline. Its teachings did not rely heavily on complex rituals or long recitations. Instead, monks encouraged meditation, reflection, and a steady mind. These ideas fit naturally with the demands placed on the warrior class. The practice of zazen, or seated meditation, stood at the center of the tradition. Warriors who visited monasteries learned to face silence and stillness. Meditation helped them observe their thoughts without being controlled by them. This training held practical value. In battle, fear and hesitation could lead to fatal mistakes. A samurai who remained calm under pressure gained a clear advantage. Meditation helped cultivate that clarity. Zen also taught acceptance of impermanence. Everything was seen as temporary, from daily concerns to human life itself. This perspective shaped how many samurai approached the dangers of their profession. Death was a constant presence. A warrior needed to act without fear clouding judgment. By reflecting on impermanence, samurai found a way to face risk with steadier resolve. Many monks admired the discipline of the samurai, and samurai respected the strict training of the monks. As these groups interacted, they influenced each other. Some samurai supported temples, funded new buildings, or sought advice from respected teachers. In turn, Zen monasteries offered instruction that blended spiritual practice with practical guidance. These exchanges shaped not only personal development, but also cultural life. The connection between Zen and the arts also appealed to the warrior class. Zen monks practiced calligraphy, ink painting, poetry, and the tea ceremony. Each of these arts demanded precision, simplicity, and attention to the present moment. Samurai found meaning in this approach. A single brushstroke contained intent and focus. A tea gathering highlighted respect, order, and calm movement. These practices offered balance to the harsh realities of warfare. The idea of mindfulness influenced how samurai carried themselves. Awareness of posture, breath, and surroundings became part of daily life. Warriors learned to pay attention to small details, whether in conversation, strategy, or combat. This awareness supported both practical readiness and personal discipline. Zen also reinforced the importance of direct experience. Monks encouraged students to learn through action rather than lengthy explanation. This approach aligned with the training of the warrior, who gained understanding through practice, repetition, and real-world testing. A samurai learned the weight of a sword by holding one. He learned decision-making through responsibility in the field. Zen treated insight the same way, something realized, not memorized. However, it is important to understand that not all samurai were devoted followers of Zen. The warrior class included many beliefs, including other branches of Buddhism, local traditions, and Shinto practices. Zen was one influence among several. Its prominence grew because its values resonated with the demands of samurai life, not because it replaced older beliefs. Over time, the mix of Zen ideas and warrior expectations contributed to a developing code of behavior. This code was not fixed or written in a single form. It evolved across eras and varied from one clan to another. But certain ideals became common: loyalty, honesty, duty, courage, and self-discipline. Loyalty remained at the core. A samurai served his lord with the same steady commitment that Zen monks applied to their practice. Duty meant following one's role without distraction. Honesty showed respect for both self and others. Courage reflected the Zen understanding of fear as a passing state rather than a controlling force. Self-discipline connected the warrior to a higher purpose beyond personal gain. Living by these ideals required constant effort. Samurai were aware of their own flaws and sought to correct them. Families taught children to observe their elders, honor their ancestors, and train their minds as well as their bodies. This upbringing shaped future leaders who understood the weight of their responsibilities. Zen also influenced how samurai thought about conflict. Some teachings emphasized the importance of clarity in decision-making. A leader who hesitated risked the lives of his followers. Zen encouraged direct action rooted in awareness rather than impulse. The ability to respond in a steady, controlled way was valued on the battlefield and in political life. Teachers sometimes used riddles, called koans, to help students break through habitual thinking. These short, puzzling statements forced the mind to confront ideas beyond logic. A warrior who engaged with such questions learned to look past surface appearance. This skill supported strategy and intuition, both essential in leadership. The relationship between Zen and swordsmanship grew especially strong. Certain schools of martial arts taught students to blend physical technique with mental presence. The moment of drawing a blade required full attention. The strike had to be clear and controlled. Training halls became places where martial discipline and mental focus came together. Some masters wrote about the connection between the sword and the mind, teaching that true skill required both. During peaceful periods, the link between Zen and the warrior class grew even deeper. With fewer battles, samurai turned more attention to self-cultivation. They visited temples, studied classical texts, and refined artistic practices. These efforts helped shape a cultural identity that influenced not only the warrior class, but also the broader society. The influence of Zen on the samurai did not remain unchanged over time. Different eras placed different emphasis on spiritual practice, but the connection never disappeared. Even as new philosophies and political pressures emerged, the core ideas, discipline, awareness, acceptance, and steady action, remained part of the samurai mindset. Later generations looked back on this blend of warrior duty and Zen insight as a defining part of samurai character. Although reality was more complex than the idealized image often presented in later centuries, the relationship between Zen and the samurai left a deep mark on Japanese culture. The ethos shaped by these teachings helped guide warriors through both turmoil and stability. It offered a moral compass in moments of uncertainty and a framework for personal growth. In many ways, the combination of martial skill and inner discipline became one of the most enduring legacies of the samurai tradition. By the mid-15th century, the stability established by the Kamakura and Ashikaga governments had weakened. Central authority faltered, and local warlords, or daimyo, began asserting independence. This period, known as the Sengoku, or warring states, transformed samurai life once again. Battles became more frequent, alliances more fluid, and the stakes of warfare higher than ever. The collapse of central authority left many regions in the hands of ambitious warriors. Samurai served local lords who controlled their domains with varying degrees of power. Loyalty remained essential, but it was often tested by shifting alliances and the pressure to survive. A samurai might change sides if circumstances demanded, yet a reputation for courage and reliability could protect him from dishonor. During the Sengoku period, military strategy evolved dramatically. Large-scale battles required careful planning and organization. Armies now numbered in the thousands, combining mounted samurai with infantry, archers, and eventually gunmen. Fortifications became central to defense. Castles were constructed on hills, surrounded by moats and walls with narrow passages designed to slow attackers. Samurai had to master both the art of siege warfare and the tactics of open-field battles. Firearms, introduced in the 16th century, accelerated changes in warfare. Matchlock guns, known as tanegashima, allowed infantry units to deliver coordinated volleys that could break cavalry charges. Samurai adapted by combining traditional weapons with firearms, often integrating spear and gun units for maximum effect. Leaders like Oda Nobunaga recognized the power of technology and used it to achieve decisive victories, changing the nature of samurai warfare permanently. Despite the intensity of conflict, samurai maintained cultural and ethical codes. Bushido, the way of the warrior, began to crystallize during this period. Loyalty, courage, honor, and self-discipline were emphasized, even as practical considerations sometimes forced difficult choices. A samurai's behavior reflected not only personal values, but also the reputation of his lord and family. These ideals were expressed through both martial conduct and everyday life, from managing estates to negotiating alliances. Life in wartime demanded constant readiness. Samurai traveled extensively, often moving with their lords from one campaign to the next. Logistics became a key concern. Securing food, maintaining horses, and managing equipment were critical to success. Communication networks were essential. Messengers carried orders, and banners identified units on the battlefield. Discipline and coordination determined the outcome of engagements more than individual heroics. The Sengoku period also saw the rise of professionalized warrior classes. A shigeru, or foot soldiers, became a critical part of armies. They were trained to fight with spears, bows, and firearms, complementing the skill of mounted samurai. Commanders developed strategies that coordinated samurai and a shigeru, creating flexible and effective forces. The hierarchical system ensured that leaders could control large armies while maintaining discipline. Political cunning was as important as martial skill. Daimyo negotiated alliances through marriage, tribute, and promises of land. Samurai were often involved in these arrangements, serving as envoys, advisors, or enforcers. A warrior's ability to navigate both diplomacy and combat became essential to survival and advancement. Success depended not only on the battlefield, but also on the complex network of relationships among lords and retainers. During this era, castles became centers of power and culture. Beyond military functions, they housed administrative offices, residences, and storage for supplies. Samurai families lived within these fortified compounds, and their retainers maintained the surrounding lands. Castles symbolized authority and provided a base from which lords could project influence across their domains. Their construction reflected the growing sophistication of military engineering and strategic planning. The constant threat of warfare affected all aspects of life. Farming schedules, taxation, and trade had to accommodate military campaigns. Samurai oversaw these activities, ensuring that resources were available for both civilian and military needs. They acted as local judges, administrators, and protectors, blending governance with martial responsibilities. Despite the chaos, cultural development continued. Samurai supported arts, religion, and education. Tea ceremonies, poetry, and painting flourished in castle towns. Zen Buddhism remained influential, providing discipline and perspective in the midst of conflict. The warrior class valued these pursuits as extensions of their training, cultivating refinement alongside martial skill. The Sengoku period also witnessed the rise of legendary samurai figures whose stories have endured for centuries. Leaders like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu combined military genius with political strategy. They unified large portions of Japan and established new orders of governance, setting the stage for a more stable period under the Tokugawa shogunate. These unifiers demonstrated that the samurai were not merely fighters, but also administrators and state builders. Their ability to manage armies, maintain loyalty, and integrate new technologies defined the class's role in shaping the country. Success depended on skill, adaptability, and the careful balance between traditional values and practical necessity. The period also reinforced the social hierarchy. Samurai solidified their status above peasants, merchants, and artisans, while retaining obligations to protect and govern their territories. Their identity as a ruling warrior class became firmly established. The combination of martial prowess, loyalty, discipline, and cultural cultivation distinguished the samurai from other groups and solidified their place in society. By the end of the Sengoku period, Japan was poised for unification. The experiences of decades of war had refined samurai tactics, strengthened social structures, and prepared the class for a long era of governance. The constant interplay of battle, strategy, administration, and culture had created a resilient and adaptable warrior elite. This era transformed the samurai from provincial warriors into leaders capable of guiding the entire country. Their influence extended beyond the battlefield, shaping governance, society, and cultural life. The lessons learned during the age of civil war would resonate for centuries, defining the ideals, practices, and institutions that became synonymous with the samurai. The unification of Japan under Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1600 brought an era of relative peace that would last over 250 years. With the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate in Edo, the samurai class faced a profound transformation. The chaos and constant warfare that had defined their existence during the Sengoku period gave way to governance, administration, and social oversight. Their skills as warriors remained respected, but their daily lives increasingly revolved around bureaucracy and cultural responsibilities. The Tokugawa government enforced a strict social hierarchy. Samurai were placed at the top of society, above farmers, artisans, and merchants. Their privileges included stipends, legal protections, and status symbols like the right to carry two swords, the daisho, consisting of a long katana and the short wakizashi. These swords were more than weapons. They were symbols of authority, honor, and membership in the elite warrior class. With the country largely at peace, samurai no longer faced constant battle. Instead, many became administrators, managing the domains of their lords. They oversaw tax collection, enforced laws, and maintained public order. The bureaucratic duties of the samurai required literacy, organization, and diplomacy. Officials learned to balance enforcement with fairness, ensuring the smooth running of towns and villages under their jurisdiction. Training and martial arts remained important, but emphasis shifted toward personal refinement and discipline. Swordsmanship schools, known as ryua, flourished, preserving combat techniques while promoting mental focus and etiquette. Archery, horseback riding, and martial exercises continued as training for discipline and physical fitness rather than immediate battlefield necessity. These practices reinforced identity and the ethos of the warrior, even in a peaceful era. Education became central to samurai life. Families encouraged study of literature, Confucian ethics, calligraphy, and history. Confucianism, with its focus on loyalty, duty, hierarchy, and moral governance, complemented the practical and ethical lessons of Bushido. Samurai were expected to cultivate both mind and body, reflecting a balance between martial and civil responsibilities. Knowledge of law, politics, and administration allowed them to perform their duties effectively, maintaining their social position and guiding the communities under their care. The role of women in samurai households adapted as well. Samurai wives managed estates, trained children, and maintained the family's honor and discipline. They also oversaw education, ensuring sons and daughters were prepared for the responsibilities of the class. Household management, etiquette, and ceremonial duties became important markers of status and influence. With peace established, cultural life flourished. Samurai participated in arts like poetry, tea ceremony, flower arranging, and painting. Mastery of these pursuits demonstrated refinement and virtue. A well-rounded warrior could navigate both the formalities of courtly life and the practical demands of administration. These cultural practices reinforced discipline, mindfulness, and patience, qualities rooted in earlier Zen influence. Despite the absence of large-scale warfare, the Tokugawa shogunate maintained strict military readiness. Samurai were expected to keep their weapons, armor, and training up to standard. Periodic inspections, training drills, and small-scale exercises ensured that the warrior class remained disciplined. The presence of samurai in towns and villages also symbolized authority and deterrence, maintaining peace through structured control rather than open conflict. The Tokugawa government implemented policies to stabilize power and prevent uprisings. Daimyo were required to spend alternate years in Edo under the Sankenkotai system. Their families lived in the capital as virtual hostages, ensuring loyalty while fostering centralized control. Samurai accompanied their lords to Edo, further integrating them into the political structure and strengthening the shogunate's oversight. Over time, the samurai's military function became increasingly symbolic. Peace reduced the necessity of armed engagement, and many samurai became bureaucrats or scholars. Yet, the ethos of Bushido remained central. Courage, loyalty, honor, and self-discipline continued to guide behavior and social expectations. Even in administration, the samurai's identity as a disciplined, principled warrior persisted. Economic pressures also shaped samurai life. Stipends from their lords were fixed, and inflation sometimes reduced their value. Many samurai took up additional responsibilities, such as teaching, farming, or even participating in local commerce, though involvement in trade was often seen as beneath the class. These challenges tested the balance between maintaining status and adapting to changing conditions. Samurai ethics emphasized restraint, respect, and moral leadership. Their presence maintained order in a society where social hierarchy was central. They adjudicated disputes, supervised resource management, and enforced laws, linking their historical role as warriors to their new responsibilities as administrators and community leaders. Cultural patronage flourished alongside governance. Samurai supported temples, shrines, and artisans. The tea ceremony, influenced by Zen principles, became an important ritual for demonstrating composure and refinement. Calligraphy, poetry, and painting provided outlets for self-expression and disciplined focus. These pursuits reflected the dual identity of the samurai: martial and cultured, practical and philosophical. The prolonged peace of the Tokugawa period allowed the warrior class to consolidate traditions and values. By integrating military discipline, administrative skill, ethical conduct, and cultural practice, samurai formed a distinctive social identity. Their influence extended beyond direct governance, shaping culture, social norms, and the expectations of Japanese society. As the centuries passed, the samurai's role remained both symbolic and practical. They were enforcers of order, embodiments of cultural ideals, and bearers of a warrior legacy. Even as Japan modernized in later periods, the lessons and values cultivated during the Tokugawa era left a lasting mark on the nation's identity. The transformation of the samurai from battlefield warriors to administrators and cultural leaders demonstrates their adaptability. Peace did not weaken their status, it reshaped it. The combination of discipline, loyalty, intellect, and refinement became the hallmark of the class, ensuring that their legacy endured long after the end of the shogunate. By the mid-19th century, Japan faced mounting pressure from both internal and external forces. The arrival of Western powers, with advanced technology and military might, challenged the traditional structures that had kept the country isolated and stable for centuries. The samurai, once the backbone of Japan's military and social order, faced a period of unprecedented change. Their role, privileges, and very identity were about to be redefined. The arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's Black Ships in 1853 marked a turning point. Perry's mission demanded that Japan open its ports to international trade, backed by a clear demonstration of military power. The Tokugawa shogunate, aware of its limitations against modern Western armies, agreed to negotiations. This marked the beginning of the end for the samurai as the dominant military class. The threats exposed the technological gap between traditional samurai arms and modern firearms, steam-powered ships, and artillery. Internal pressures compounded the external threats. Economic strain, political discontent, and regional uprisings challenged the shogunate's authority. Many samurai, particularly those of lower rank, struggled to maintain their status and stipends. Some were forced to sell land, take alternative jobs, or adapt to commercial pursuits. The rigid social hierarchy that had sustained the samurai for centuries could no longer absorb the economic and social pressures of a rapidly changing society. Reform efforts accelerated during this period. The shogunate introduced measures to modernize its military, encouraging the adoption of Western techniques, weapons, and training. Some samurai embraced these changes, joining newly formed armies or studying abroad. Others resisted, clinging to the traditional code of Bushido and the expectation of personal valor. These divisions reflected a deeper conflict between heritage and modernization, honor and practicality. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked the official end of samurai authority. The emperor was restored to power, and the centralized government sought to create a modern nation-state. One of the most significant reforms was the abolition of the samurai class as a hereditary military elite. Stipends were gradually replaced with government bonds, and restrictions on land ownership and occupation were removed, allowing former samurai to enter business, education, or civil service. Military structures were also reformed. A conscripted army, open to all male citizens regardless of class, replaced the samurai-dominated forces. Modern firearms, artillery, and Western-style tactics became standard. Samurai who wished to maintain a military role had to join the new national army, competing alongside men who had previously been considered lower status. This shift represented both an opportunity and a challenge, as centuries of privilege and identity were suddenly redefined. Resistance to these changes erupted in several regions. One notable rebellion was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Seigo Takamori, a former samurai who opposed the rapid dismantling of the class. Thousands of samurai marched in protest, seeking to preserve their traditional role. Despite their skill and determination, they faced overwhelming modernized forces. The rebellion ended in defeat, signaling the definitive end of the samurai as a military and political force. The fall of the samurai did not erase their cultural influence. Former warriors adapted to new roles in government, education, industry, and commerce. Many became leaders in the modern military or bureaucracy, carrying with them the discipline, loyalty, and ethical training of their class. The values cultivated over centuries continued to shape Japanese society, even as the formal structures of the samurai disappeared. Bushido evolved into a guiding principle beyond the battlefield. Its emphasis on loyalty, honor, and self-discipline influenced modern education, corporate culture, and national identity. Samurai stories, rituals, and symbols were preserved in literature, theater, and later film. The class became a cultural ideal, representing dedication, courage, and the balance between duty and moral judgment. Despite the loss of legal privileges, the samurai legacy remained visible in daily life. Former samurai families maintained a sense of identity through education, martial arts, and community leadership. Swordsmanship schools transitioned into modern martial arts dojos. Calligraphy, tea ceremony, and other cultural practices continued, linking the new era to centuries of tradition. These practices reinforced the continuity of samurai values even as society modernized. The decline of the samurai also reflects the broader theme of adaptation. Japan's transformation into a modern state required flexibility, innovation, and sometimes sacrifice. Samurai, accustomed to preserving status and authority, faced the challenge of redefining their roles. Their experience navigating war, governance, and cultural life allowed many to adjust successfully, contributing to the nation in new ways. By the late 19th century, the image of the samurai had shifted from living warrior to cultural icon. Their story was commemorated in literature, art, and public memory. Monuments, historical texts, and later popular media celebrated their courage, loyalty, and ethical code. The narrative emphasized both martial skill and moral virtue, creating a lasting model for the ideals of personal conduct. Even today, the legacy of the samurai shapes Japanese society. Modern martial arts, literature, corporate values, and national identity bear traces of samurai principles. Their influence is found not only in the memory of battle, but also in the continuing emphasis on discipline, responsibility, and ethical behavior. The transition from centuries of military dominance to cultural and symbolic influence represents a remarkable evolution. The samurai endured as a social, moral, and cultural force, even as their military function disappeared. Their story illustrates the interplay between tradition and change, showing how values cultivated over generations can survive even radical transformation. The decline of the samurai was not simply an end, but a transformation. Their spirit, discipline, and ethical code persisted, embedding themselves into the fabric of modern Japan. Though swords no longer dictated status, and battlefield skill no longer determined power, the ethos of the samurai remained a guiding force. Their story stands as a testament to adaptability, resilience, and the enduring power of culture, shaping Japan long after the last battles were fought. The samurai may have lost their formal status as a ruling military class more than a century ago, but their influence continues to shape Japan in both tangible and symbolic ways. The values, aesthetics, and stories of the samurai have left a lasting imprint on Japanese culture, ethics, and identity. One of the most visible legacies is found in the moral code often associated with Bushido. While the historical Bushido was never a single formalized set of rules, its ideals, loyalty, honor, courage, self-discipline, and responsibility have informed both personal and professional behavior in modern Japan. Corporate culture, education, and public service all reflect elements of these principles. The emphasis on dedication, diligence, and ethical conduct in Japanese society can be traced, in part, to the cultural imprint of the samurai. Martial arts provide another clear connection. Swordsmanship evolved into kendo, archery into kyudo, and the study of hand-to-hand combat into judo, jujitsu, and aikido. These disciplines preserve the training, focus, and ethical considerations that were central to samurai education. Students learn more than physical techniques. They also cultivate patience, concentration, and respect for others. These practices keep the samurai ethos alive in everyday life, long after their role on the battlefield has ended. Literature, theater, and film have also immortalized samurai culture. From historical chronicles and classic kabuki plays to contemporary movies and anime, the samurai are depicted as exemplars of courage, honor, and moral clarity. Stories often dramatize loyalty to a lord, personal sacrifice, or the tension between duty and conscience, bringing the ethos of the samurai to new audiences. These portrayals, while sometimes romanticized, maintain public fascination with the warrior class and their values. Architecture and design offer subtle reminders of samurai influence. Castles, gardens, and estates built by or for samurai reflect their aesthetic sensibilities, emphasizing balance, harmony, and strategic thinking. Modern Japanese design, with its focus on simplicity, precision, and functionality, echoes these principles. Even in urban planning, the influence of samurai-era foresight and attention to detail can be traced. Education and leadership training in Japan often draw inspiration from samurai ideals. Lessons in ethics, responsibility, and civic duty echo the same sense of service and self-discipline that guided samurai families. The idea of leading by example, maintaining integrity, and balancing practical skill with moral judgment reflects a centuries-old tradition rooted in warrior culture. Festivals and cultural events keep samurai heritage visible in everyday life. Reenactments of historical battles, displays of martial arts, and preservation of swords and armor connect communities to their history. Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples, once associated with samurai patronage, remain centers of cultural continuity, reminding citizens of the integration of spirituality and discipline in samurai life. The global fascination with samurai has also contributed to Japan's cultural footprint. International films, literature, and video games frequently explore samurai themes, showcasing their discipline, strategy, and ethical dilemmas. This worldwide interest has elevated the samurai from historical figures to universal symbols of honor and skill, creating cross-cultural dialogue about courage, morality, and identity. Even modern military training and strategic thinking in Japan have roots in samurai methods. Concepts like preparation, leadership, situational awareness, and disciplined response to uncertainty mirror the skills honed over centuries by warrior elites. While technology and society have evolved, the underlying principles of adaptability, readiness, and moral responsibility continue to resonate. The legacy of the samurai also highlights the relationship between culture and social transformation. Their shift from battlefield dominance to bureaucratic and cultural leadership illustrates how identity can adapt without losing essence. The values they cultivated, discipline, honor, and ethical conduct, transcended the collapse of their formal power. These qualities became embedded in societal norms, shaping Japan's modernization in the Meiji period and beyond. Samurai influence is also evident in the Japanese approach to artistry and craftsmanship. The meticulous attention to detail in sword-making, armor construction, and martial arts training has parallels in contemporary design, manufacturing, and creative work. This focus on precision, quality, and patience remains a hallmark of Japanese skill and professionalism. Finally, the samurai continue to inspire individuals on a personal level. Their stories of courage, resilience, and moral judgment provide models for facing adversity. The notion of living with purpose, maintaining self-discipline, and acting with integrity transcends time and culture, making the samurai ethos relevant even in the modern world. The samurai left a multifaceted legacy. They were not only warriors, but also administrators, cultural patrons, and ethical exemplars. Their influence shaped governance, social norms, art, and philosophy. Even as Japan entered the modern era and moved beyond feudal systems, the lessons, values, and cultural imprint of the samurai endured. Today, they remain symbols of courage, discipline, and honor, bridging centuries of history while continuing to inspire society, culture, and imagination worldwide.